On this exact day, January 19th, in the year 1901, a single telegram was rushed from the quiet sanctuary of Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. It was addressed to the royal family, but its contents would soon ripple across the entire globe. It contained just a few hushed words, but it signaled the end of the world as the 19th century knew it. The Queen, the woman who had ruled for 63 years, the only monarch most of the living world had ever known, was dying. To understand the gravity of this moment, you have to realize that Victoria was more than a queen. She was the grandmother of Europe, a woman whose bloodline sat on almost every major throne, from London to St. Petersburg. But behind the heavy velvet curtains of her bedroom, a drama was unfolding that the public was never meant to see. There were secret medical reports, a panicked German emperor racing across the freezing sea, and a list of forbidden items that Victoria demanded be buried with her. Items her own children were strictly forbidden from seeing. Today, on this 125th anniversary of her final days, we are reopening the classified files on the death of Queen Victoria. Why was her failing health kept a state secret for the first 24 hours? What was the true nature of the tension between her heirs? And most importantly, what was really hidden inside that coffin when it was finally lowered into the earth? To find out, we must step back into the bone-chilling January of 1901. By the end of 1900, Victoria was a shadow of the woman who had once commanded an empire upon which the sun never set. At 81 years old, she was nearly blind from cataracts and crippled by rheumatism. She had lost nearly half her body weight, looking like a frail, small child, huddling in her massive bed. The loss of her beloved husband, Albert, 40 years prior, had never truly healed. And more recently, the deaths of her son Alfred and several close friends had pushed her into a deep, vascular depression. But on the morning of January 19th, the situation turned from a slow decline into a national emergency. Victoria suffered a series of paralytic strokes. She began to lose the one thing she valued most, her voice. As she struggled to articulate her final wishes to her lead physician, Sir James Reid, the palace went into a state of silent panic. While the official bulletins told the public that the Queen is fine, the reality inside Osborne House was total chaos. Her eldest son and heir, Prince Albert Edward, known to the family as Bertie, was paralyzed with the fear of the crown he was about to inherit. Meanwhile, her grandson, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, did something that shocked the diplomatic world. He abandoned the 200th anniversary celebrations of the Prussian monarchy, a massive event in Berlin, to rush to the Isle of Wight. He wasn't just coming to say goodbye to a grandmother. He was coming to claim his place in a world that was about to lose its stabilizer. As the fog rolled in over the Solent and the Victorian era took its final breaths, the people in that room knew they were standing at the edge of history. But the biggest secrets were still to come. Secrets involving a simple gold ring, a lock of Scottish hair, and a 12-page manual of instructions. That would change the way we look at the Queen forever. As the sun set on January 20th, the atmosphere inside Osborne House shifted from somber to electric. The silence of the Queen's sick room was broken not by voices, but by the heavy footsteps of European royalty arriving in a desperate hurry. The world outside saw a unified front of grieving relatives, but inside, a hidden war was being waged for control over the Queen's final moments. At the center of this storm was Kaiser Wilhelm II. To history, he is the villain of World War I, but in January 1901, he was simply a grandson obsessed with his place in the British succession. His arrival was a masterclass in political theater. Having raced across Europe, he pushed aside the Queen's own children to take his place at the bedside. The friction between the Kaiser and his uncle, the future King Edward VII, was palpable. They represented two different worlds. One, a crumbling old order of absolute monarchs. The other, a modernizing empire that was increasingly suspicious of German intentions. For 3 days, these men sat in a room that smelled of antiseptic, beeswax, and fading lavender. The medical records from those 72 hours, kept meticulously by Sir James Reid, reveal a woman who was no longer a queen, but a grandmother, drifting back into the memories of her youth. In her delirium, Victoria began to lose her grasp on the present. She didn't ask about the war in South Africa or the state of the Navy. Instead, she whispered, "Is the pony here?" It was a heartbreaking moment that silenced the room. She was no longer the Empress of India. She was a young girl again, back in the gardens of Kensington, looking for the simple comforts of her childhood. While the royals bickered over protocol, the medical staff was dealing with a logistical nightmare. Victoria's body was failing in ways the public was never told. Her strokes had left her right side paralyzed, and her ability to swallow was nearly gone. Yet, the family insisted on a constant rotation of visitors, each one wanting a final look at the woman who had defined their lives. Sir James Reid later wrote in his private diaries about the ghastly exhaustion of those days, not just for the Queen, but for those tasked with keeping the mask of royal dignity from slipping. The tension reached a breaking point on January 21st. Rumors began to leak to the press that the Queen had already passed, leading to a frantic series of denials from the palace. In truth, Victoria was hanging on by a thread, her heart proving to be as stubborn as her character had been for 8 decades. It was during these quiet, midnight hours that the first of the secret instructions began to circulate. Victoria had spent years preparing for this moment. She knew that once she was dead, her children would try to erase certain parts of her life. She began to use her remaining strength to ensure that wouldn't happen. She made it clear to her doctor, and only her doctor, that her funeral was not to be a black affair of gloom. She wanted white. She wanted light. But most importantly, she wanted to be buried as a soldier's daughter. This was a side of Victoria the public rarely saw, the woman who felt a deeper connection to her army and her servants than to the high society politicians of London. As the clock ticked toward the 22nd, the stage was set for a funeral that would break every rule of royal tradition. As we reach the heart of this mystery, we must look at the secret Victoria carried for nearly 40 years, a secret that her children spent decades trying to burn, bury, and erase from history. To the public, Victoria was the widow of Windsor, the woman who wore black every day in memory of Prince Albert. But inside the walls of Balmoral and Osborne, there was another man who held the Queen's heart, and his name was John Brown. John Brown was a rough, plain-spoken Scottish gillie, a servant who had originally worked for Albert. After the Prince Consort's death, Brown became Victoria's constant companion, her protector, and some say, her secret husband. He was the only person allowed to speak to the Queen with total honesty, often swearing in her presence or telling her to get a move on when she was being slow. The royal family, led by her son Bertie, absolutely loathed him. They saw him as a commoner who had bewitched the Queen, and they waited like vultures for him to die so they could reclaim their mother's attention. When John Brown passed away in 1883, Victoria was once again inconsolable. She moved from mourning one man to mourning two. But she knew that once she herself passed away, her children would move quickly to destroy every trace of her relationship with Brown. This is why her secret instructions were so specific and so dangerous. She didn't trust her own flesh and blood to carry out her final wishes. Instead, she turned to her physician, Sir James Reid, and swore him to a secret that could have ended his career. Victoria's 12-page burial manual was a masterpiece of defiance. She knew that her son, the future king, would be watching the funeral preparations like a hawk. So, she ordered that her coffin be filled with layers of flowers, lilies, gardenias, and white roses. But it was what was underneath those flowers that mattered. She demanded that a photograph of John Brown be placed in her left hand, positioned so that it would be hidden from view when her children came to say their final goodbyes. But it went further than a simple photograph. She requested that a lock of Brown's hair be placed in a small silk case and tucked into the side of her coffin. Most controversially, she wore a gold wedding ring on her finger that did not belong to Prince Albert. It was a ring that had belonged to John Brown's mother, given to Victoria as a symbol of their private bond. These were the forbidden items, the mementos of a love that the British Empire was not supposed to know about. As the doctors and dressers prepared her body in the quiet hours of January 23rd, the tension was unbearable. Sir James Reid had to wait until the royal family left the room before he could reach into his pocket and retrieve the secret package. He placed the photo in her hand, wrapped her fingers around it, and covered it with a lace handkerchief. Every time a member of the family entered the room, he had to act as though he were merely adjusting the silk lining. It was a high-stakes game of hide-and-seek, played out on the body of the most powerful woman in the world. This wasn't just about a romance. It was about Victoria's final act of independence. She had spent her life being told what to do by ministers, by her husband, and by her children. By carrying John Brown into the grave with her, she was making sure that in eternity, she belonged to no one but herself. As we move into the final hours of her journey, we begin to see that the Victorian era didn't end with a whimper. It ended with a secret rebellion that remains buried beneath the floor of the royal mausoleum to this day. On the morning of February 1st, 1901, the world witnessed a sight it had never seen before. For centuries, the death of a British monarch had been a somber affair of heavy black drapes, dark horses, and an atmosphere of oppressive gloom. But as Victoria's coffin emerged from Osborne House, it was draped in a gleaming white pall, embroidered with the royal standard. This was the white funeral she had demanded, a final, bright farewell to a century she had shaped with her own hands. The journey from the Isle of Wight to Windsor was a logistical feat of epic proportions. The coffin was carried across the Solent on the royal yacht, passing between rows of battleships from every major navy in the world. As the guns fired a final salute, the smoke filled the air, turning the day into a ghostly twilight. It was as if the very machinery of the British Empire was weeping for its mother. But even as the public watched the grand procession, the secret items remained tucked safely inside the coffin, held firmly in the Queen's stiffened hands. When the procession reached Windsor, a strange and famous incident occurred that many took as a sign. The horses assigned to pull the gun carriage became restless and broke their harness. For a moment, there was chaos. It was as if the horses themselves refused to carry the weight of the era to its end. In a flash of quick thinking, a group of sailors stepped in, using ropes to pull the carriage by hand. This created a new tradition that continues in royal funerals to this day. But at the time, it felt like the world was literally stalling, unwilling to let Victoria go. Finally, in the private depths of the Frogmore Mausoleum, the doors were closed to the public. Only the closest family members remained, as the Queen was finally laid to rest beside her beloved Albert. For 40 years, she had waited to join him. But as the heavy stone slab was lowered, the secret of John Brown remained intact. Sir James Reid had kept his word. The photo, the lock of hair, and the ring went into the earth with her, shielded by the white silk and the thousands of flowers that had begun to wilt in the cold January air. Now, 125 years later, we stand in the year 2026, looking back at a world that feels light years away from the one Victoria left behind. We live in an age of instant communication and digital wonders, yet the fascination with the grandmother of Europe has never faded. We analyze her letters, we study her diaries, and we search for the truth behind the myths. But perhaps the greatest truth is that Victoria was a woman of deep, hidden passions, a queen who understood that while she belonged to the state in life, her heart belonged only to herself. In death, the Victorian era ended not with the stroke of a pen, but with the closing of a coffin lid. Within years of her passing, the fragile peace she had maintained between her grandsons, the Kaiser, the Tsar, and the King, would shatter, leading to the horrors of the Great War. The world she built was gone, but the secrets she kept remain a part of the soil of England. She remains, even now, the most mysterious woman to ever wear a crown. Thank you for joining us for this special 125th anniversary tribute. History is often written by the winners, but it is kept by those who know where the secrets are buried. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the final days of the Queen, please hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Did she truly marry John Brown? Or was it a final act of lonely comfort? We want to hear your theories, and if you want to stay updated on our upcoming investigations, make sure you are subscribed and have the notification bell turned on. Until next time, keep searching for the truth behind the legend.